I really feel the Lord has got a word for us this evening. But I have to say it's going to be more of sharing some reflections than a lecture. I've not prepared a PowerPoint or anything like that. I want to share with you what some of my own experiences have been, and also some of the things I've observed in the lives of others, I suppose. I'm 65. At that point, your mentor will fall off your chair and go, surely not. But yes, I am. I am 65. And I left teaching just over 30 years ago, actually, to work for Scripture Union, which is when I first met Steve Hutchinson. And I was at a funeral not long ago where I met up with some of my former teaching colleagues, some of whom had started teaching the same year as me, and they were retiring or had already retired. And the conversation pretty much seemed to center around what was the next cruise they were going on. It felt like that was the highlight of their lives. They were planning their lives around the next cruise, or which garden centre they'd been to recently, which was much cop, or where they play Crown Green bowls. And there's nothing wrong with any of those things if there are Crown Green bowlers on the screen this evening, I hasten to add. And then shortly afterwards, the Bishop of Worcester approached me to see if I'd consider ordination within the Church of England. We go, at that stage, I was going to a large city centre church in Worcester. All Saints stands right in the middle there by the river. And he asked me to consider being ordained. And I thought, well, here's a bit of a comparison. So most of my peers are seen to be going around the world on cruises, and I'm just about to embark on a course of study. And but I have to say, I have no regrets whatsoever about that. And bless you if you're in the position of being able to go on one cruise after another. And if that's what floats your boat, if you excuse the pun, then great stuff. But I actually feel that there are probably as many different aspirations or expectations around the prospect of retirement as there are people on the screen this evening. Because it depends very much, I guess, what your own understanding of retirement actually means, whether you've been looking forward to it or dreading it. And I think some people do dread it, actually, and I'll say more about that later. But I decided I wanted to spell it differently. So I said to Dave and Phil, oh, let's spell it RETYREMENT. Because actually it's about being retired, I feel. It's about getting a new set of tires for the next lap of your life, for the next season, whatever season that might be. And I guess some of you may have been in the fortunate position of retiring quite early, maybe. I mean, you all look fairly youthful to me, to be honest. Is that the right kind of thing to say, Dave? So maybe you've been retired for some time, or maybe there are a handful of you who are can still see this new season of life looming in the distance. And you will also know people who responded differently to retirement. There may well be those whom you know for whom it's been a real shock to the system. And whilst they looked forward to it and were getting all their financial bits and bobs in place to be able to enjoy it, they then find that they're beset with health issues or stuff like that. So it's a real mix, I think. Equally, I feel that, well, I just had a conversation today, actually, with a vicar up in near Dudley, and he was bemoaning the fact that the PCC in his church council, they've been playing up a bit, and particularly the treasurer, who's recently retired and has got a lot of time on his hands. And he's absolutely making a nuisance of himself everywhere throughout the church. And my vicar said to me, to be honest, I'm praying him out. Such is the headache that he's creating in the church, because he's got a lot of time on his hands. He's done very well for himself in his business life, so he's got quite a bit of money. you know, he's independent. He doesn't need to earn anything. And then there's my father-in-law, who's 89 and 87, and he's just planning his next missionary trip to Ethiopia for 3 months. And he's tireless, you know, tireless in his zeal to serve God. Equally, alongside all that, and I don't think this is necessarily solely for retirement, but particularly amongst men, dare I say it, there's often a passivity that seems to creep in from, I'm speaking in generalizations here, I know, and you can shoot me down in flames afterwards if you wish. But from middle age onwards, you know, there seems to be a passivity. I was speaking on Sunday at my own church, which is a little village church now, actually, in the village of Hallow, where we live. And I was challenging them about whether they were going to spectate or participate. And I would say the same to you, actually. I'm saying it all over the place. Are we spectators or are we participants in what's going on in the kingdom? And I am about the kingdom as opposed to building the church, I have to say, because I believe in full employment. I believe that if we're still here, if God has spared us thus far, it's because he's got something for us to do. And if we were done with and over and finished, then we would be with him. And that's simply put, that's what I strongly feel. But I do think that I mentor a lot of guys, you know, and passivity can be a real issue, or apathy even, actually. And the sad thing is when that continues into retirement as well. So you see, there's a whole mix there, isn't there, of responses, reactions, and aspirations. I was in Southport a few years ago, speaking to a group of retired men, and interesting place, Southport. I don't know if you've ever been there. I sort of brought the average age down quite a bit when I went to pay a visit to this church, and room full of well turned out gentlemen, and you know, dressed head to foot in Marks and Spencers, and obviously good, you know, good pensions when that was a thing in those days. And I found myself saying to them during the course of the evening, you know, each of you have a story to tell. I said, each of you have got a story to tell, and the chances are that there pretty much isn't anything that anyone might go through in life that wouldn't be represented here if we were to talk long enough. I mean, there are probably 50 or 60 guys in this room, and they'd had a Lancashire hot pot, and then they sat down for me to talk to them. And but when I said that, you know, there was just a glaze that came over their faces, and I thought, you know, I might just as well have spoken to that wall, because nothing was going. They just didn't get it. They didn't get the fact that that each of us has got a story, and again, those stories can be mixed. You know, there may be stories of great joy and celebration. The chances are they're a mix of that, and also disappointment and sadness and grief. And the reason I was saying that to them was because with my mentoring heart, I was trying to encourage them to invest in younger people in the church, to draw alongside younger couples, to draw alongside individuals and simply share their stories. Because I believe that the Church of God is thoroughly intergenerational, and I think we miss something when we have a church which is primarily young people or primarily older people, or where we lose the vision, even though it might be hard going at times. And it's hard going for us in the village where I live. It can be hard going trying to work across the generations and interest all generations in the church. But I really do feel that to represent God's kingdom, that should be our aim, and it should be what we're aiming for. So Dave introduced me a little bit earlier and said that I'm a mentor, which I am, and and also a member of the clergy here in the village where we live. We also run this place called Chapel House. We get all sorts of ages of people in here, and we've got our own website, chapelhouse.org.uk, and it's a joy to journey with people and travel with them at whatever age they are. Leo Tolstoy came out with an interesting phrase. He said, this is the entire essence of life. Who are you and what are you? Who are you and what are you? And there's a challenge. I mean, folks, anything I say to you this evening, I'm challenging myself about as well. Okay, I'm not just pointing the finger and saying, who are you? What are you? I'm asking myself, who am I, as I come into this call this evening? And what am I? What am I made of? What's the substance of me? What's the substance of you, whatever age you are? You happen to be in retirement or heading up to retirement, and I think those questions are still the same, as if you're in your 20s and your 30s. Who am I? What am I? What is it that makes me up? And I think these questions seem to sort of slice to the core almost of our experience as human beings. What are we made of? What makes us up? What values do we hold? And it may well be that for some of you, I'm looking at several couples here this evening, that you've already had those questions as you've entered into retirement or as you see retirement approaching. What are we about as a couple and as individuals? What is our vision? Are we self-aware as people? What are we communicating by the life that we live? Can people tell when they interact with us what our values are, what our aims are for our lives? Do they see by the way that we react in conversations or when there's a need in our community? What kind of a response do they see from us? And what are we communicating through that response? There's a beautiful word that I'm trying to redeem in my own life, actually, and it's the word stewardship. Stewardship. I was reading early in Genesis this morning about when, Adam and Eve were called to be stewards of creation. And that concept, it sounds a bit old-fashioned in some quarters these days, but I think the concept of how we steward our lives, how we steward the time that God's given to us, needs to be absolutely core to our lives as believers. And of course, I mentor a lot of young guys in their 20s and 30s, and these values are what I'm trying to tease out of them, as they start to get married and they have families, and then they've got career choices and things like this. And I'm bringing them back constantly to, well, who are you? What are you? Do the choices that you're making fit with what you believe your life is all about? And, I don't sit here this evening. I'm sure much of this is, it's not new to you, but maybe it's a reminder that the Lord in his grace invites us to partner with him in what he's doing in our world. God is on mission in his world. Missio Dei, that's the term that's used often to describe God on mission. And he invites us to partner with him. And he's on mission in your life at this stage of your life. And he invites you to partner with what he's doing in your life. It's not all down to you, as it's not all down to me. It's all down to how the Holy Spirit is inviting us to join in with what he's doing. And so for me, it's an incredibly exciting prospect to be in partnership with my Creator as I try and steward my life at 65. And and I'm loving it, I have to say. I love being the age I am. I'm not running from aging, and I don't say that lightly. I mean, I've got my diabetes and my cholesterol and my high blood pressure and everything else that I have to try and keep under check. I have to watch the sugar that I eat, etc., etc. So I've got those kind of things, and maybe you have too, and maybe other stuff that's going on. But I want to steward. How can I approach my life where I'm at with what I've got and offer it in the best way I can as an act of worship to God? That's my desire. And there are some times, I have to be honest with you, there are some times when, well, there are not sometimes, there are regularly times actually when Jane and I, my wife, we go off for the day, or we make a point of planning our holidays, and we believe in that. We believe in Sabbath rest. We believe in the importance of rest, that we should all be operating from a place of rest. That features. But as long as I've got breath in my body, I want to embrace the phase and stage of life that I'm at and make the best possible use of it. Now, I acknowledge that, these getting this new tread for a new lap, it can be challenging, because we've worked hard all our lives, and we think, well, actually, I do want to come down a gear, and absolutely right. And as I say, I don't know, I only really know Steve. I don't know where you're all at. I don't know what your approach to life is, but I do think it's good that after a lifetime of work, or that you've got more choice about how you spend your time. But equally, as Christians, there is a responsibility on us to be good stewards of what we can offer to the Lord. I've got two little props here. I was trying to remember if I actually used these when I spoke at your time. I did, didn't I, Steve? Yeah. Well, for those of you who were there, well, here it is again. And for those of you who weren't there, here are my two batons. And so here's a relay baton, and here's a conductor's baton. And the reason I want to use these is to illustrate two what I think are significant points as you approach this retirement phase. Because for many of us, this symbolizes what life has often been like. It's been a race. It's been a race. There's been pressure. There's been expectations. There's been demands on our time, whether that's been professionally or family-wise. You might feel they're still there if you're at the stage of picking up grandchildren from school and things like that, which is what I think most grandparents that I know seem to spend their time doing. Anyway, so the baton symbolizes the race that many of us are in, actually. And I've used this baton on many occasions, particularly when I've been speaking about leadership and talking about encouraging people to be willing to pass on the baton of leadership to the younger generation. And I've spoken about the exchange zone as if I really know what I'm talking about. And I've never been in a relay race in my life, so don't be fooled. But I know that there is a key timing when you're passing on the baton in a relay race. And it's all about the person that you're passing it to receiving it, and about you letting go of it. And there's a whole, almost a theology around the passing on of the baton. And of course, St. Paul himself talks about the race and uses the analogy of the race and encourages people to run that race well. But I do think that there comes a stage in our life, and maybe it's retirement, maybe for some it's before retirement, when it gradually begins to dawn on you what's happening. That I'm defined by my productivity. That's what I think the race often communicates. That it's what we produce, it's what we achieve, that's defining us. And I want to suggest to you that there comes a time in our life when you may continue with this baton. And if that's you, and if that's what brings you life, then go for it. But the second baton I want to use to illustrate the point I'm trying to make is the conductor's baton, because I think there does come a time in your life when you realize that actually what's more important than being in the race and achieving and being defined by productivity is finding your place in the orchestra. Finding your place in God's orchestra. And this is back to what I was saying about who are you? What are you? It's about asking ourselves serious questions about where we fit in God's orchestra. And there will be those, of course, who are first violin and are quite content to be first violin and are key players and give the other violinists their lead. Or there'll be those in the percussion who make a lot of noise. And that's their role, to bang those big kettle drums at the right time. But also, of course, there'll be the little chap at the back with the triangle who every so often, when it gets the right place in the score, just goes ding, ting, almost unnoticeable. But he knows it's the part he's called to play. And he's watching the musical score until it gets the right point when he's required. And he goes ding. And for some of us, as we approach retirement, or as we embrace and engage in those years, whatever age that is, it's about seeking help from those around us who can help us to find what the best use of us is going to be when we no longer feel we've got to be defined by having a title or by seeing our name on the rota, and not feel intimidated or threatened or useless if someone doesn't ask us to get involved in a particular task. And maybe when part of being defined by the race and the baton has dominated so much of our life, that can be a hard pill to swallow when we suddenly realize that we're not quite required as much or needed as much, or dare I say it, used as much. But there's something there about not being defined by that productivity, but being fully committed to discovering the richness of who God says I am, and discovering afresh my identity in him. So part of my retiring, if you like, is that pit stop. I've got the image in my mind now of these racing cars, they go, all right, pelt around the track, and they stop and get their tires checked and whatever else needs checking on the cars. And maybe we need some time to allow others to speak into our lives. And it may well be, that having come to the end of our working life, or at least salaried working life, that we do actually need to take some protracted time out. And maybe some of you have done that. I was speaking to a young friend of mine the other day, and he was just making an observation that he feels that we need to watch the ego carefully. Well, we all need to watch the ego carefully, and ego isn't just an issue for teenagers and 20-year-olds, is it? It's for us all our lives. We all have egos, and sometimes those egos get stroked, and our own sense of self-importance can grow. And again, I'm pointing at myself here, and I'm running myself through this filter that I'm sharing with you. But my young friend said to me, he said, I look at some people in ministry sometimes, and I think what they actually need is a time on the bench. You know what I mean by that? Nod your head if you know what I mean when I say they need a time on the bench. They need a time which they can just take out of this prominent ministry that they've got and fast-paced activity, and just take time out so that they can realize that the church will still go on without them. And that can be really challenging sometimes. But of course, the mandate, I love those verses in Matthew's Gospel, chapter 11. You'll know these very well, I'm sure. Come to me, get away with me, and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. This is Jesus speaking. Walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it. And this is a beautiful phrase. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. Isn't that beautiful? Can you kind of nod or something? It's really weird speaking to a kind of just a blank of faces that are staring at me. Thank you. I love that beautiful phrase there, the unforced rhythms of grace. That this isn't about striving, running, productivity. This is about finding my place in God's orchestra, playing my part. And sometimes it might involve me being prominent. At other times, I might be a page turner for another musician, but being willing to embrace it. I think one of the challenges comes, of course, when as we retire and we find ourselves with more time, when we've not been used to resting or knowing how to rest well. Then there's a challenge. And I speak to a lot of guys, and say, I'm just rubbish at resting. I don't know how to rest. I don't know how to step off the treadmill. I don't know how to reduce my pace. When I go on holiday, my mind's still racing. I'm still thinking about work. I go to bed at night thinking about work, and I'm not present to my family. I'm not present to my children. Big issues around that. And I think that those of us who are retired and can afford to take a bit more time over things and to take our rest more seriously, we've got a life to model to the younger generation. Do you agree with that? We've got a way of doing things that we need to model to our children and our grandchildren around the value of rest. There's a I was reflecting a couple of weeks ago. Do you remember this book from school? It's The Boy in the Temple. It's the story of Samuel and Eli. Do you remember it? Oh, good. Oh, good. A couple of people can remember it. There's little Samuel, look, with his blue fluffy blanket. And whenever I think of Samuel, or whenever I hear the name Eli or Samuel, I still think of that blue fluffy blanket, in the temple. And you'll remember the story, I'm sure, from 1 Samuel chapter 3. So just come with me for a moment to the Holy of Holies, where Samuel was asleep in the temple. You remember Hannah, his mother, had brought him to Eli because he was a miracle baby. She didn't think she's ever going to have a child. And she presented him to Eli, and he serves Eli in the temple. He's not very old, and the Bible tells us that he doesn't yet know God. He doesn't have a relationship with God. He's never experienced God acting. And then one night, you know the story very well, Samuel hears this voice. He hears his name being called. And on 3 occasions, he runs into Eli and says, yes, what is it? You called me? What is it? And Eli says, no, I didn't call you. Go back to bed. And then eventually Eli cottons on to what's happening. And he says to Samuel, the next time you hear that voice, say, speak, Lord, for your servant is listening. And of course, then what happens is that this young boy, we don't know how old he is, but he's old enough to be able to open the temple doors the next day. He must have been at least a toddler. But he hears the Lord speak quite clearly a rebuke to Eli. for the way that his sons are behaving, and they're messing around with other women, and they're taking money from where they shouldn't be taking it, and they're really bringing Eli into disrepute. And the Lord shares this with Samuel, and the next morning Samuel gets up, and Eli summons him. And I just want to read you what Eli says. Then Eli summoned Samuel. Samuel, my son. Samuel came running. Yes, what can I do for you? What did he say? Tell it to me, all of it. Don't suppress or soften one word, as God is your judge. I want it all, word for word, as he said it to you. So Samuel told him, word for word. He held back nothing. Eli said, he is God. Let him do whatever he thinks best. And we know, don't we, the incredible prophetic life that Samuel then had following that encounter. It's a beautiful passage, and it's a passage I often use when I'm talking about mentoring. I also say it was the first example of residential youth work in the Bible. I'm not sure whether whether Steve would agree with me over that, but but it's a beautiful example of the generations connecting. That's what I love about it. And I love the fact that Eli had got Samuel in his care as the mentor, if you like, or as the coach or the spiritual director, we can use that language. He's placed Samuel in a position where if God is going to speak, they trusted that he would speak in that place. And God did speak. So Samuel's, spent a lot of time, Eli spent a lot of time investing in Samuel. And when this incident happens, whilst I'm sure Eli must have been thrilled to think that God was actually speaking, he was also very nervous because of what God might say, because God had already spoken to Eli and warned him. Then he uses this young boy to bring back this truth into Eli's life. And there's something wonderful here about the life of generations in a church community. So whether you're retired or whether you're in the creche, I believe that in God's kingdom, in God's purposes, there can be two-way communication, even among those generations. So as we retire, I think one of the things we can be on the lookout for are those young people that we want to pray for. We might not have massively close relationship with them, but that doesn't stop us praying for them and praying that a prophetic gifting might be released among them. So I think sometimes as we get older, we get a bit sort of maybe complacent. Does God really still speak? Can he really put his finger on things in the life of our church? Could it actually happen through a child? Well, yes, my scripture union training, Steve, you'll be impressed with this. My scripture union training for this would say, yes, of course he can. So, let's, I hope that encourages you and energizes you to think that this actually could happen. So I've spoken quite a bit about what I might call the aspirational element of being retired or approaching retirement, because I know you're not necessarily all in that bracket. But there have to be a few questions about how do we get there then? That's the question I then go on to ask. If I'm sharing about some of the aspirations that could feature in retirement, how can we actually get to where we want to be? And I don't have masses to say on this, but a few things which I think it's worth sharing. And the first is to embrace the grace of aging. Embrace the grace of aging. We're entering into a season that God has been preparing us for all our lives. All your life. All your life, God has been preparing you for this season that you're now in. And he's calling you to consider what your legacy is going to be. What's it going to look like? I'm not talking about financial legacy here. I'm talking about the legacy that you are leaving in the lives of others. One of my friends, Carson Pugh, has written a book on mentoring that I'll refer to a couple of books at the end, actually. But he identifies three life development phases in adulthood. The first he calls the age of learning, 18 to 30. And he's got a question for each age group as well. So the age of learning, 18 to 30. And he says the question that most people ask in that phase is, who am I? Who am I? Maybe they might have had a parenting. Maybe it was good, maybe it wasn't so good, but they're asking lots of questions about who they are, and they're finding that identity in maybe the work that they do. The second life development phase is the age of contribution, 30 to 50, when that's about what do I do? It's back to this productivity, back to the race, when it intensifies, when careers are getting established and families are being born and all that kind of thing. The age of contribution, what do I do? But then the third phase that he identifies is the age of investment, 50 plus. In whom or what should I invest myself? And that's the legacy. That's the legacy. And in a sense, it goes back to where I started. What are you going to do with your stories? The stories that make up your life. How are you going to allow those stories to invest in the younger generation? But of course, one of the barriers to that, I think, and you might want to come back to me later, there will be some time for some questions, but one of the barriers to it is what we might call the shadow. And any of you who have ever had any counseling or done any therapy of any kind will understand this concept that we all have a shadow, actually. There's a darker side, not necessarily sinful. It just might be something that's in our makeup, something that's in our character that we struggle with, or there may even be issues in our shadow and we can't quite put our finger on what it is. But if we're not careful, it can disqualify us, because it can make us think, what have I got to give? That I've done a few things I shouldn't have done in my life, and some things which nobody knows about, and I don't have the courage or the confidence to step forward thinking about my legacy into people, because this has disqualified me. The thing I did years ago, or be it, some sort of behavior or whatever it might be, fill in the gaps. And if we're not careful, that can disqualify us. We can also be disqualified by wounds from childhood, or by lack of affirmation by our mums and our dads in childhood. And it can live on in us all our lives. Justin Welby was interviewed, not Justin Welby, John Cleese was interviewed by Justin Welby. And John Cleese was talking about parenting and about leadership, and that your leadership is often shaped by the parenting that you've had. And John Cleese's point was that there's often a little voice inside the head of particularly of people who are in leadership, which goes something like this. Daddy, look at me. I'm the chairman of a big company now. Or Daddy, look at me. I'm a head teacher now. Or Daddy, look at me. I'm a doctor. Or I'm a policeman. The point being, do you remember those days when maybe you can think back to your own children, or maybe you've seen your grandchildren when they're learning to ride a bike, and there comes a point where the stabilizers can come off and they pedal away like mad, and what often comes out of that, look at me, Daddy, look at me, Mummy, look at me. And that desire for affirmation, unless it's done very generously in childhood, it can beset us all our lives. And I know many guys in particular who are still trying to please their dads, and their dads have been dead for years. Still trying to please their dads, and their dads have been dead for years. And they live with this constant driven desire to achieve. And even in retirement, I suspect they won't even be able to let go of that. So the freedom doesn't come so naturally in those places. But we know within God's kingdom, and I know some of this is a generalization, and I'm sure you've had all sorts of feelings as I've been speaking. But there's a company of people that God has put around us who he wants us to be genuine and authentic with and to pray with. And I'm talking about the mentoring principles here of one-on-one discipleship. And if you want to know any more about it, ask Steve Hutchinson. You probably sat through some of his mentoring training. Or I'd be happy to talk to anybody about the skills involved in mentoring. But I long for meaningful conversations in my own church with what's largely an elderly congregation who would be willing to take a look at the things that are still holding them back from becoming all that God wants them to be. Does that excite you? Does the prospect of becoming all that God wants you to be at whatever stage you're at in life, does that excite you as a principle? There is still so much more for you to, as you embrace the grace of aging, that you can enjoy, and that you can find a place within your church congregation where you can function, where you can find your place in the orchestra, where you're not clamoring for a position or clamoring for applause. You can be content to sit there maybe at times and just ting the triangle when it gets to that point in the score. And I wonder, as I throw out these challenges and these questions, I'm sure that if you were to think about some of the people that you've known in retirement, for whom it has been an incredibly powerful time, it's an inspiration. It's an inspiration to meet older people who are, firstly, patient, and secondly, present. Patient and present. I'm listening to a podcast currently by Pete Gregg from the 24/7 prayer movement, and he was talking this morning about patience and presence. And I thought, that's not a bad spiritual ambition as we get older, is it? to demonstrate patience as a fruit of the Spirit. Because maybe when a lot of your life has been characterized by impatience and urgency, to be the kind of people who, as we get older, as we move into retirement, are known as patient people who will listen in an unhurried way, who will not listen to a younger person and constantly be thinking, well, I can't stay here all day. I've got something else to go and do, you know. It's a real gift to a church community. And will we be present? Will we be radically attentive to people and what's going on in their lives? Will we see that as our mission in our community as retired people? To watch, to listen, to take note, to not judge, to pray, to be present to people and be patient with them. Will we be remembered for that? And I'm sure you could think of people that you know or have known in the past who demonstrate those two qualities. I'm sure of it. And then there's the question of what we might call generativity. It's in that verse really in 2 Timothy 2. And the things you've heard me say in the presence of many witnesses, tell them to reliable people who will be qualified to teach others. We're meant to pass the gospel on, aren't we? We're not meant to hang on to it. We're meant to, it brings life and energy and passion, and we're meant to share it. I suppose in summary, what I'm talking about here is giving more attention to your soul than to your role. More attention to your soul than to your role, because I've got this sneaking suspicion. If we will attend to the matters of our inner life, and will wholeheartedly commit to being disciples, to flourishing, to be the best that we can be for God, then everything else will take care of itself. We learn to live from the inside. We learn to work with God and not just for God. Going back to my point about being in partnership with the Holy Spirit and what he's doing. We discover that it's more about rhythm and blend than balance. Balance always implies pressure to me. Whereas having a life in later years that is blended and has rhythms to it, that feels quite life-giving. We need to raise up the elders, raise up the true elders in our communities. I don't know if you've heard, there's an international organization called the Elders, actually, and it's in the past, it's had people like Kofi Annan on it, and two of the prominent elders at the moment are Mary Robinson, who was the president of Ireland, and also Ban Ki-moon, who was a former Secretary General of the United Nations. And they've just started a visit to Israel and Palestine. They're not paid for what they do. They're in a position of being able to travel, and they go as elders into international situations where they can bring peace, patience, and presence. They're currently looking at how to tackle challenges to security. They're facilitating peace and dialogue for Israelis and Palestinians alike. And they don't go striding in with a huge amount of power. They just go to be present in some of the difficult areas of the world. See, I am convinced that, that like Caleb in the Old Testament, we can say, give me this mountain. And he was 80 when he said that. Give me this mountain. What's the next challenge you're calling me to take? And we can pursue, in so doing, whatever it is that makes us more like Jesus. Let me mention the 3 books. The first one is the one I referred to earlier. It's called Mentoring Leaders by a guy who rejoices in the name of Carson Pugh. And Dave, I can always send links to these books if anybody would be interested. That's particularly for the person who's they've been sparked a little bit by this concept of mentoring and being able to invest in a younger generation. This book is by a guy called Parker Palmer, and it's called On the Brink of Everything, and it's subtitled Grace, Gravity, and Getting Old. Grace, Gravity, and Getting Old. It's a beautiful book, very funny writer as well, and not a difficult read. Lots of poetry in there and stuff to inspire you. And then thirdly, my friend Tony Horsfall has written a book called Spiritual Growth in a Time of Change, Following God in Midlife. And he talks about early, mid, and later midlife. He doesn't use that horrible term old age. He talks about early, mid, and later life, and spiritual growth in a time of change. It's like water to the soul. And he writes from his own experience. He's in his 70s now, and I like to listen to people who've been through what they're talking about. Well, I feel like I've opened a vein here this evening, and I haven't stopped for 45 minutes. So, Dave, what about if we see if there are any questions on what I rattled on about?
That'd be great. Thanks, Paul. And so if you have a question for Paul, please just unmute yourself and fire away.
Please do.
Yeah, having retired 3 times from paid employment, now at 80, I'm trying to slow down, but there's still things to do. My favourite George Whitfield quote is, "My life is immortal until God's work is complete." Now, George Whitfield didn't quite take that to heart, because he wore himself out on one job as an avid evangelist and died too early. He died as a young man. But that sort of that's my motto for life. Okay, or the rest of it I've got, having reached 80.
Yeah. All I would say is, I mean, I think that's brilliant, and all I've got on your screen is drink. That's the only name I've got for you. So
yeah. Well, there's another little attachment to that, another syllable, and it's water.
All right. Okay. Well, all I was going to say was that sometimes I feel as maybe our spouses or our families have often borne the cost for the working life that we've had. And sometimes it's good in retirement to sort of somehow be more available to family and to husband or wife. But I couldn't agree more with you about we don't hang up our boots. Right, another question, anybody?
So, Paul, I love the baton thing, as you know, because you left your baton at Hillview when you did the talk there.
Oh, I did, yes, didn't I? Yes.
I brought it back for you. So I'll never forget that. But as you were talking about that, I thought about 1 or 2 situations I'm involved in, not necessarily in church, could include that. But what about when there's no obvious person to hand the baton on, and yet you think, really, I'm not sure if I should still be doing this for whatever reason, maybe you feel too old, or you feel that it needs a new breath of sort of young life in it, or something like that. Done this for a long time, maybe, but I'm very happy to pass the baton on, not a problem, ready for that. But
yeah, I've got 2 thoughts, and they might not be popular thoughts. but here's my first one. And someone said this to me many years ago, that just because there's no one else to take on the job is not a good enough reason for you to continue doing it.
Fair enough.
It's quite hard hitting that, but actually there's a lot of wisdom in it. And the other thought I have is that, sometimes people are reluctant to step forward because you're doing such a good job. And it's only when there's a gap and the pressure is on that someone might actually come forward and say, I think I could do that. We've had a similar situation here with a very simple little example of there's an elderly lady who's always circulated our parish magazine, right? And she's well in her 80s now. And to be honest, she's had enough of it. And so she said to me one day, I really need to hand this on, but I'm not sure who to hand it on to. And she couldn't think of anybody who might take it on. And that very same morning, someone else had overheard that conversation I'd had with this lady. And this person came up to me and said, you know what Pat was just saying to you? I said, yes. She said, I'll do it. I'll take it on. totally, unexpected, out of the blue. I mean, there aren't always those kind of people around, I know, but sometimes it's worth thinking that there might be. Thanks, Steve.
Yeah, good answers. Thank you.
When you give up paid employment and then you go into retirement, Paul, you've mentioned the fact that indolence can creep in.
Yeah.
But then the opposite to that is being just as busy as when you were working, but just not being paid for it.
Yeah.
How do you marry that with God's desire for you to find your place in the orchestra?
Yeah. Very good question. And I think my initial response is it's about boundaries, which again is something else, which when this is sort of the icon of the kind of lifestyles we lead, to actually begin to institute some boundaries so that we can talk through with a trusted friend, what are the things I should say yes to and what should I say no to? And it also ties in, I think, with that question I asked very early on about who am I and what am I? What do I want to model about life in the stage I'm at? Do I want people to see me as somebody who is constantly having to be busy and driven, or am I able to demonstrate that to rest, genuinely rest, is a healthy starting point for life? Is this, Dave, am I going off on one, or is this answering any of you?
No, that's exactly what I meant.
Yeah.
I think you've obviously either over challenged us or answered all of our questions.
I don't think I want to know.
And I'll leave you to ponder on that one.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay, great.
Okay, unless anybody else has a burning question, perhaps we could close the evening and say a big thank you to Paul for a stimulating and helpful talk. And it's given us, I think, a lot of food for thought for those that are retired and also those that are coming up to retirement. And may we all find our place in God's orchestra, I think is
Amen.
probably my take-home message that I've had this evening. So thank you for that.
Amen. God bless you all.
Let's just pray and to finish
pray.
and then we'll say goodbye. Father God, we just thank you for Paul and his message to us, and we do pray that we all indeed would have a better understanding of who you want us to be. And we pray, Lord, that as we seek to serve you, we would find that right place in the orchestra, whether that be right at the very front, being very busy, or just at the back with a triangle. Lord, may we just find that place that you want us to be in and fulfill that role.
Yes. Lord.
So thank you, Lord, for your goodness and your grace to us as we seek to serve you in all stages of our life. Amen.
Amen.